Then the press will begin with their questions. You will have 2-minute answers. When the press is finished with their questions, then we'll ask questions from the audience. And again, you'll have a 2-minute answer. Then after those are finished, you will have a 1-minute closing. Audience, the cards are up here. If you'll just hand it to Don so that they can get it. We're ready to go.
Well, good evening. Glad you're here today. You're about to witness brutal, violent agreement on elections, on corporations, certainly on occupational licensing, and perhaps even securities. But what you see here, one of us is not like the others. You've got 3 lawmakers, and we're happy for their service, but you also have 1 mayor. And here's what mayors know. Mayors know that there are 2 sides of an executive job. There is the direct responsibility side. That's the side, by the way, all the questions tonight are going to be on, is that direct responsibility side. But there's also the flip side of that, the flip side of the coin, so to speak, and that is the direction, the visioneering, the chart-porting side. And that's the side that I believe that we can help and grow Georgia's key industries of agriculture, technology, and logistics. It's that same side that has helped us to build, I think, an incredible statewide organization. Now, just under 40 mayors supporting us statewide. It's that same ability that's going to be able to create, help us create and achieve objectives that are beyond the authority and the resources of that office. And what mayors know, and knowing that second side, is what's helped Alpharetta to grow to over 640 technology companies and over 100,000 jobs. And it's that same side that is going to help us achieve the objectives, the things that we're running to do as your next Secretary of State, which is just 2 things: defeat voter fraud and champion Georgia jobs. David Belle, Republican candidate for Secretary of State.
Good evening. My name is Brad Raffensperger, and I'm running for Secretary of State. I'm running to make sure that only Americans vote in our elections, to make sure that Georgia is a great place to find a job and a great place to build a business. In my 7 years of elected public office, 4 years in the State House, 3 years on City Council, I've always worked to protect taxpayers, small business owners, life, and the Second Amendment. I'm the only person that's standing here before you today that has a 100% rating from the Faith and Freedom Coalition of Georgia. I'm a business owner. I have a manufacturing plant in Columbus, Georgia, and I have another plant in Forsyth County. Now, from those 2 manufacturing plants, we worked on construction projects in over 35 states. So I've seen how some states make it easy to do business, and I see how some states have made it very hard to do business. And as your next Secretary of State, my job is to make sure it's easy to do business in the state of Georgia. On a personal note, in the 11th grade, this girl moved to our high school from about 70 miles away, and that was Tricia. Tricia and I have been married now for 40 years, and this is where we chose to raise our family and build our businesses. I am a licensed structural engineer and a licensed general contractor, so I understand the critical importance of having responsible licensing boards. At the end of the day, what you'll know when you vote for Brad Raffensperger for Secretary of State, I will fight to make sure that only Americans vote in our elections, make sure that Georgia is a great place to find a job and a great place to build a business. Thank you.
Okay, this question is for everyone, and we should start it, but security in our voting system has been an issue in the last couple of years. Voter information was breached, and then last year there was an investigation into the KC server. So is our voting system secure, and what will you do as Secretary of State to ensure security in the system? Mr. Belle.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the Kennesaw State situation has resulted, I believe, in moving that database directly under the Secretary of State's office. That is the right move. Now, in terms of voter security, what I want to see done, and we've had a lot of discussion both inside this race as well as outside this race, about what is the next step in terms of voter machines and voter technology. And what I want to see is a system, essentially, where you go, like today, when you show your voter ID, you'd be essentially given a piece of cardstock. That piece of cardstock you would submit into the voting machine. You would make your choices just like you do now. And when you do, there would be an electronic record, much like the electronic record we have today. But then when you push cast ballot, it would print out that selection onto that piece of cardstock. You'd be able to visually verify that the vote you just made electronically is represented on that piece of paper. You then would take that and submit it to a second machine, which would scan it and make a second electronic copy, and then also be able to store that hard copy. And so each and every vote would have 3 records of that vote. One standard electronic copy like we have today, a PDF type scan electronic copy, and also a physical copy. And then what I would advocate is on the back end of that, as we store our database, that we would take those 2 electronic copies and store them on 2 completely closed circuit cybersecurity servers. And I think there's 2 advantages of that. One is better cybersecurity, because we do need to keep up and keep the cutting edge in terms of keeping our votes secure. But the other is better voter confidence. And I know that this is a Republican primary, so the reason I tell you voter confidence is important, not just because it sounds good, but because do you know what happens when Republicans don't think the vote is going to be fair? What happens when we don't think our vote is going to be counted? We stay home. And so not only is voter security important, but voter confidence is very important. I think that's the way to do it.
To your specific question, which was, how do you maintain the confidentiality of the confidential voter information in Kennesaw State? The challenge that we really have now is we had some technology and we had people there that were supposed to be monitoring that. When they failed in that job and was brought in, and rightly so, the challenge we have, there's only a couple people left in the Secretary of State's office that are monitoring that confidential voter information. Your Social Security numbers have been encrypted. There's only 4 numbers that now show, which is a good thing. But if you look at what's happened with all the credit monitoring agencies, banks, and other things, it's very difficult to maintain control over that. There is some technology out there which actually changes passwords almost on a continual basis. It's very advanced technology, and those companies are located here in Metro Atlanta. So we have that access of technology, and that's something we need to look at incorporating into that. We also do have a cybersecurity center in Augusta, and because of that, we really are becoming a leading edge along with Georgia Tech. So that's really specifically about your question. But sometimes we look at technology, and there's a cost of technology, but sometimes it gets down to the simple things, which is training and communications. Now, I understand that Chick-fil-A is one of the greatest corporations in America. They have tremendous people that work there. And I don't want to put down the part about technology. I know they have the technology component, but their training and their communication is very tight. And that's why when you go there, you get great service. But we need to bring that same type of service into the Secretary of State's office. I'm a business owner. My business has about 175 people. And that's what I do each day, is training and communicating with my employees, because you just can't go and spend dollars that you don't have all the time to fix solutions. Sometimes it's working with people that we have.
Gentlemen, first of all, thank you again for being here this evening. We appreciate it very much. And we'll start this question with Buzz, and this is for the entire panel. We've already heard tonight you all are very similar in a lot of ways, and quite frankly, that's refreshing. But the voters do have to make a choice. Buzz, starting with you, can you give me 3 reasons why voters need to choose you for their next Secretary of State?
As a business owner, we didn't start with 175 employees. We started with me working up in the bonus group, doing my engineering counts in the evening, and then doing the sales calls during the day. And so it took someone to have vision and really see where I'd like to take this business. And I just really worked hard at it. Had some setbacks and had some successes. And I think that's really important, because the Secretary of State's office does require someone with a positive, forward-looking vision of where they want to take the organization, and being able to bring people together. People with dissimilar views and attitudes, but get them to work together as a cohesive team. I think that's very important. I am a licensed structural engineer. I'm a licensed general contractor. There's 40 different boards, and those happen to be 2 of them. So I understand how important responsive licensing is to a license holder. But also, I think what's really important and I probably wouldn't have this when I was young and confident. If you look at, you have grace on this side and you have truth on that side. Grace can be very permissive. Truth can be very rigid. At the end of the day, when you bring together both your brain and your heart and you lead with courage on that, that's the essence of humanity, and that's what the Republicans need. We win with our heart when it's married with our brain. And that's what I bring to the Secretary of State's office. Thank you.
3 reasons, well, we could go on, but I'm going to say one, I think I have the best plan to defeat voter fraud. I have the best plan and best experience to champion Georgia jobs. And I'm the best person to be able to beat John Barrow in November. And so on defeating voter fraud, our plan is very simple. The first one is we want to actually implement the Proof of Citizenship Act. The Proof of Citizenship Act was actually passed by the legislature in 2009. It is yet to be implemented, which means right now, if you were to get a voter registration form on block 5, you can check the first box and you can put your driver's license number. If you don't have one, no problem. You can put your social security number in the middle of that box. If you don't have one of those, no problem. Check the box on the far right. It says you have neither a driver's license number nor a social security number, and you will be registered to vote whether you are a U.S. citizen or not. We have to implement that Proof of Citizenship Act right away. The second one is I believe that we need a photo ID requirement for the absentee ballot. It's what Kansas does. There's a good process to do that. On the third, we talked about the machine, so I'll go to the Champion Georgia Jobs side. In Alpharetta, what we were able to do is recognize that not one person from the dais could legislate or fund growth in our key industry. And so we reached out to our key industry technology leaders, and we were able to create the state's first technology commission, a volunteer group that was able to then land a technical college, that was able to then launch a technology incubator that serves over 50 technology companies, and has also been able to land a conference center and make the case for it, growing to over 640 technology companies and over 100,000 jobs. And on the question of who's best to beat John Barrow, we can't pick a horse that has a history of dividing his own party. You have to have someone that says, look, it's not just about defeating voter fraud, there's a bigger picture that can help every Georgian, everywhere. That's what mayors do, and that's what I'll do as your next Secretary of State.
Mr. Belle, I mentioned earlier that he talked about the voting machines that are currently in place. Georgia's voting system machine, as you know, is 16 years old. Most of Cherokee County's machines are that old. Some of them have been purchased since then. If we could start with Mr. Kuhn, who do you support replacing those machines, and if so, when?
Yes, I believe we need to update the voting machines. As you pointed out, the current voting machines were put into service in 2002, 16 years ago. And you look at the iPhone, we're up to the iPhone X, and you look at how many generations of new technology Apple's put into that phone. The current software with the current voting machines have not been supported since 2005. The Secretary of State's office did a trial run in the city of Conyers for a municipal election. And so that machine looks similar to what we have right now with an electronic component. And when you press the button, it was not to cast the ballot, it was to print the ballot. It then printed out a ballot and you could look at it, and then you took it over to the optical scanner. I think at the end of the day, I think we need to look at all the different technologies, all the different platforms that are out there, and then put out an RFP and get low qualified bidder. And then we move forward with that. We had 3 bills in this last session. None of them were actually moved forward, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have a voting system that has a verifiable paper trail. I think that's very important. That gives people, it's similar to in accounting, you have the double journal bookkeeping system, so you have belts and suspenders. You have the electronic part, then you have the paper trail. I think at the end of the day, it is a big lift, and we need to make sure we bring in the 5 key components. The county election supervisors were not part of the process during the General Assembly we just had, and they descended on the Capitol. I want to make sure that we pull those folks in so they can speak to it. Also, we want to make sure we pull in the elected officials, the House, the Senate, and the governor. They're going to have to vote to fund that. And the other one that is very key is your county election supervisors. They need to be part of the process. any technology experts that are out there that have been saying we need to do something, and we need to do it. Thank you.
Well, I spoke a moment ago about the need for new machines and what I thought the system should look like, and it's important. And here's the thing, it is true that the Secretary of State cannot simply fund it from their budget. In fact, the budget of the Secretary of State is actually barely enough to do constitutional duties, and there is no room for capital expenditures. The cost of new machines is going to cost somewhere between $100 and $120 million, just to be frank. And so what you're going to need in order to get to that next generation of machines to make sure we have top-notch voter security and also solid voter confidence is you're going to need someone who knows how to work within and without and outside an organization to be able to gain influence and actually get that body on board. And also what I would do, and this is what we do in city budgets, it's what county commissioners and county chairs do in their budgets as well. Sometimes when you have a sizable fiscal need, you don't pay for it all in 1 year. You can straddle that over multiple fiscal years. And that's what I would look to do for two reasons. A, I think it's easier for the state legislature to get behind a $35 million or $50 million expenditure for that fiscal year. It's also easier on the implementation side. I think trying to implement machines over 159 counties in a single year with 159 county election boards is a tall order. I think the idea is that you would implement it gradually, at least over 2 years or perhaps 3 years, based on the county board of elections that do it best, and working their way over to Fulton County, which is where I'm at. But to make sure that we implement it in the right way and get the training done in the right way of the system. So that's what I would do as your next Secretary of State.
Gentlemen, this next question, I think we're going to start with you, Brad, is, in your opinion, the current Secretary of State, what would you say that has been his most positive action in the Secretary of State's office during his tenure? And would you seek to emulate his leadership style or take things in a different direction?
I believe that Secretary Kemp's home run was the SEC primary. That put us on the map. We're finally into play, and it was important, what Georgian voters did in the presidential primary. So I think that was a home run. Secretary Kemp is a man of honor. He's a good family man, and I respect that. I've been married to Tricia for over 40 years now. And he's just a really nice person, great guy, and I think the SEC primary is the one that he really hit out of the park. Thank you.
This is that violent agreement again. I would definitely say the SEC primary is something that's allowed Georgia to have a bigger say in the presidential election. That's the importance of it, by the way. It's not just moving the primary around. It's the idea that the presidential candidates have to first come to the state of Georgia so that they can hear from our residents, from our citizens. And what that does, being a statewide candidate, much smaller scale. But when you hear from residents, when you hear constituents, it does alter how you see things. It kind of gives you a lens in which to look through the rest of the race from. So I think that is important. Another thing that's important, we kind of touched on it a moment ago, is I think it's incredibly important, and this is nothing against Kennesaw State or anyone went to Kennesaw State, but the Secretary of State is responsible for the security of our voter information, which means that that information needs to be directly under his supervision and under his control and not in a third party. And I think it's important to bring that inside, and they're starting to do that now. And I think that's been an excellent decision by Secretary Kemp as well. And I think in terms of, the second part of that question was about leadership style. While I know Brian Kemp, I don't know that I'm qualified to comment on his leadership style, but I will say, I believe that there's two sides of the coin again. There's those direct responsibilities, corporations, elections, securities, licensing, but there's an opportunity. They say we have 159 counties. They say 85 of those 159 counties are projected to lose both jobs and population by the year 2030, in just 12 years. And so I think it's imperative that we look beyond those direct responsibilities and focus on growing what Georgia does best: agriculture, technology, and logistics.
Okay, this should be my final question, and we'll start with Mr. Brockman. Many of you have talked tonight about voter fraud, so my question is, how prevalent is voter fraud in Georgia, and what will you do to ensure the integrity of our elections?
I think, excuse me, the biggest issue or entry point for voter fraud right today would be absentee voting. And what I proposed is right now it requires one witness, and I believe that two witnesses would make a lot of sense. If you think about going back to Deuteronomy 19, it requires two witnesses to convict someone in a court of law. Well, likewise, it's tough when you have two people for them to keep quiet. Someone said the only way to keep two people from talking about it is when one of them is dead. And so I think that kind of puts a little bit of, flesh behind it. The other thing is, right now, we could add on the bottom of that, letting people know that it'd be a felony for false swearing, because to make a false statement, false swearing is a felony. And if we did that, that would add a little bit of fear and trepidation in people thinking about what they're doing and what they could be doing. The other issue is we haven't prosecuted like I believe we should. We did in Northwest Georgia. I think there was well over 50 cases of absentee or falsified voting. And I think that that is something that you hear about it, you need to go ahead and take care of it. Also, we need to make sure that we ensure the 150-foot rule of no politicking at voting areas. During the 2008 election for Barack Obama in DeKalb County, there were people that were handing out water bottles with jackets that said Barack Obama for president. And really, there's kind of almost a fear factor there. They should have been run out because that was really politicking within that 150-foot zone. We do probably need to add more enforcement officers because the budget right now doesn't allocate enough for enforcement. But when you do hear about a problem, you prosecute. Make an example of people that keeps other people from thinking that they can bend the rules and get around the system. Thank you.
Well, imagine for a moment, while Mr. Raffensperger was speaking, if there was a hole in this bottle and it was pouring out water, and I'm like going, wow, oh my gosh, well maybe I should know how much water is in the bottle before I plug the hole. Of course not. You'd stick your finger over the hole and you plug the hole. And that's been the argument on voter fraud, especially from the Democrats, is that, look, you don't know how much voter fraud there is. It's a non-issue. And until you know how much voter fraud there is, don't talk to us about it. We see this in the responses to our posts that we've been running this office. It's like, no, it's not a big deal. You don't know how much there is. And here's the thing, we don't know. And so to secure and to defeat voter fraud, to secure our elections and defeat voter fraud, some of the things we've already talked about, and I kind of went through a list earlier, but I'll repeat them because they bear review. And that is that, yes, absolutely we need to implement the Proof of Citizenship Act, making sure that only U.S. citizens vote in U.S. elections. It's got to be done. We had trouble under the Obama administration and the Obama Department of Justice, but now we have a president who believes in election security, and it's time to act, and that would be my first priority. The next thing is implementing not just witnesses. We need a photo ID requirement for the absentee ballot. Nothing else will be as secure as that. And then finally, the voting machines we already talked about, but then there's the backside that we haven't really talked about. And one of the things that I recognized as mayor is that I didn't have all the answers in terms of how to build the technology industry. I also don't have all the answers in terms of being a cybersecurity expert. However, I know how to get people involved and engaged that are. Alpharetta is a technology south, and we have a tremendous cybersecurity environment. But the state of Georgia also has tremendous resources in this area. And that backside, that data, that closed circuit cybersecurity data storage is critical. And under the system that I proposed earlier, I believe storing both the normal electronic vote and that scanned paper vote also in two separate databases is critical and important to make sure we have secure elections.
Gentlemen, this will be my final question. I will not be offended if you just say yes or no, but feel free to expand as you care to or want to. Are you of the opinion that at this point, early voting in the state of Georgia needs to be expanded, or are we there? And I think starting with
Early voting was put into place for convenience at one level for people that were traveling on vacation, things like that, so they could early vote. But also, it was sold with the idea that you'd actually increase voting turnout. And research has shown it has not increased voter turnout. Whatever that percentage was before, that's basically what you get right now. So we haven't gone from 50% voting to 80%. It's really been a static. And so I would not support increasing it. In fact, you can make a very solid case that it should be reduced by 1 week. And the reason that would primarily be not so much for the large counties, it's really for the smaller counties in Georgia. It doesn't sound like much, but for these smaller counties, it's a huge financial burden on them that doesn't get paid for by the state. That's a county cost. And some of these counties have less than 20,000 people. There's some with actually less than 10,000 people. So it's a huge burden. So I wouldn't increase it because studies have shown it's not increasing voter turnout. And if anything, we need to take a look at just really 2 weeks make more sense. Thank you for the question.
Well, I always hear the response, well, what about the counties, what about the counties? And I'm sympathetic to the counties. What about the cities? And here's the thing is that cities, and most of y'all probably know this, city elections are on odd years, which means we don't get to piggyback with the county when we have a city council election or when we have a mayoral election. And here's the thing, when early voting began to be a thing, even in a city like Alpharetta, the cost went astronomical. It now costs somewhere between $115,000 to $120,000 just to run a municipal election. And the reason is because there's a 3-week early voting. So it's not just an unfunded mandate for counties and rural counties, it's also for all our cities. And the thing that we labor under sometimes is we think, oh, well, that's free. There's no cost for that. Well, of course there's a cost for that. If the city of Alpharetta, for instance, spends $115,000 on elections that it didn't have to spend, that's a road that doesn't get paved, right? That's something that a park program that doesn't get implemented, that's something that we have to take away from the rest of the funding unless we're willing to raise taxes for that, and we're not. And so I believe that early voting, that makes sense. The 3 weeks is too long personally, and I would certainly be open to public opinion on this and citizen feedback, but I would say move it down to 1 week. It shows that the early voting, you got the first 2 days of early voting, it's intense. The last 2 days of early voting, it's intense. Do a week, include a Saturday, that's fine, make it 6 days. But that'll be more affordable for the counties and certainly more affordable for the cities.
Your first audience question is, what is the most important conservative principle and how would you apply it to the office of the Secretary of State? What is the most important conservative principle and how would you apply it to the office of Secretary of State?
Well, I'm going to break the rules and do it in 2 parts. I do believe the most important conservative principle is actually local control. And a lot of times people think it's low taxes, and I do agree with low taxes and fiscal responsibility. But as a mayor, it's a pet peeve who gets a lot of unfunded mandates from the state legislature, who also gets unfunded mandates from the federal government. I believe local control is the most important conservative principle. In terms of this, here's the thing. Everything we've talked about tonight, we haven't really gotten to, maybe we'll get to them in the citizen questions. All we've talked about tonight is elections. We haven't talked about occupational licensing. We haven't talked about securities, charities, corporations, or any of that stuff. But here's where I do believe, because I do believe that the priority we place on elections is important. Because I do believe that the integrity of our country depends on the integrity of our elections. And that comes right back to the security issue, making sure we not only have great voter security, but great voter confidence. But local control, I'm not exactly sure how we, on the fly here, how that applies from the Secretary of State standpoint, which is a statewide office, other than working with our county in those elections.
Limited government. When I ran for city council, I said government needed to be downsized for this generation. It's just grown too big. It's out of touch. Limited government. Government taxes should be lowered wherever possible. And that's why I repealed the ability that Fulton County Tax Commissioner to earn a 50-cent per tax lien fee. Didn't sound like much, but there's 80,000 tax liens in Fulton County, and he had $40,000 he was earning. And it didn't go into the county coffers, it went into his back pocket. So I worked on repealing that. I worked on increasing homestead exemptions. So I understand how hard people work, because I come from the construction industry. And it's boom and it's bust. And when it's bust, you learn how to stretch a penny, stretch a dollar. It's really tough. And that's what it's like, that's what it's been like in America. When the economy collapsed in 2008, we really never had the political class to be honest with you and tell you that we were in a depression. And it was a depression. It was camouflaged because we started at a higher wealth base and we had transfer payments. And that's why it's a little bit different than your daddy or your granddaddy's, depression. And I didn't have to wear the same, shoes that my dad did for 6 years during his depression. But I say all that, limited government, we need to make sure the government is right-sized for today, so you can keep more of your hard-earned dollars. That's very important to me. Thank you.
How would you leverage the web and technology to improve the Secretary of State office?
As it relates to the Secretary of State's website, I would believe we need to make incremental improvements. A few years ago, we had a website that was functioning fairly well and was taken down, and a new vendor's website was put up. We just had an awful lot of issues, connectivity and really connecting people to what the information they needed. So I think we need to do a review, and almost you need to dumb it down and have someone that's not very strong with technology and say, hey, go ahead and navigate around this site. Is it something that makes sense to you? Because that's what you really need to make sure that it is, something that's user-friendly. Because people that are really strong with technology, particularly our younger generation, they'll navigate and not have any issues. But sometimes, some of us that didn't grow up with that, we're going to say, now, how do I find this, how do I find that? And so I think we need to really go back and look at what makes the most sense for how our human minds work, so we can really have a website that works for us. It's very important for, obviously, people that are doing licensing and corporations. And sometimes they feel like they get lost in the maze. And I think having that upgraded, I think that would really improve the service to the most important person in Georgia, which is the taxpayer. Thank you.
In my day job, as an attorney, I work with the corporations division on a regular basis. And there has been definitely a downgrade in terms of turnaround and service with respect to filing corporations. And a lot of that has to do with the software we had several years ago. I'm terrible with how long things were ago, but the previous program that we had was not as advanced, perhaps, not as shiny, but it was a lot more effective. In addition to that, that is, with the Secretary of State's office being very much a hat-in-hand position, hardly funded to do those constitutional duties, even though there's plenty of money that goes through the Secretary of State's office, very little of that money comes back to actually help him do his job. That's where those expedite fees came in from the corporations, and now, and Secretary Kemp's doing what he can. He's using those expedite fees to plug the gaps, the funding gaps. But as a constituent, as the businesses in the state of Georgia, oftentimes we're having to pay the $100 fee that you do just to file a new company, and then a $250 fee just for the expedite. So now you're talking $350 and you haven't even started your business yet. And so those are the things that we really need to take a good look at. But the Secretary of State's website as it stands, it's glossy, it's pretty. I'm not sure it's as efficient as it can be. And that's just on the corporation side. There's also, I think, my wife, once upon a time now, my wife now works in my business, but once upon a time she wanted to explore being a signer. Well, how do you get to be that? There's really not a lot of pathways highlighted as to how you get from one career to the next when it comes to our occupational licensing. And I believe that that website should at the very least paint that path. Where do you get educated for that particular occupational license? How long does it take? Make it as easy as possible for our residents and those who might want to find a better career through our occupational licenses. So there's a lot, I think, that can be done to make it simple, to make it easier for people to get to good work. Thank you.
Which professional license board would you work to drastically reform or even eliminate? Josh.
Heritage sent out an email just a few days ago about Nebraska. Nebraska is looking at licensing reform. And so the Institute for Justice has put out a study paper and recommending, and it's a 244-page, study. But what it shows coming out of that is so many of these licenses that are required, it's for these lower income professions, like hair braiders, cosmetologists, and things like that. Not engineers who, when they come out of Georgia Tech, are starting at over $65,000 a year. And so I think we really need to take a hard look at the whole licensing process to make sure that we're not hurting the little guy, the little woman, the person that is not at the higher levels, but really just looking for a job, and then they have to have this licensing. Because what they found out in Nebraska when they did the study, that some of these people are paying like $1,500 because they have to take a test, they have to do a course, and then they have to do remedial for renewal of their license. And so it ends up to be a lot of dollars. See, Nancy Pelosi thought that $1,000 increase wasn't a lot of money. Trust me, $1,000 is a lot of money. When you're a cosmetologist, you're a barber, you're in any profession, who here doesn't think $1,000 is a lot of money? And so I think we really need to be mindful of that. So rather than naming any one profession, I'm very excited that the House is going to have a study committee over the summer months to look at the whole licensing and licensing reform and come back with concrete information for the next Secretary of State to make policy and action move on forward. Thank you.
There's been several that's mentioned that certainly deserve scrutiny. What I would like to do, there's 41 licensing boards, and then there's individual occupational licenses under those boards. I believe we need a top-down review of each and every one. And here's the litmus test. It's not hard. The litmus test is this. Is it protecting life? Is it preserving health? Is it protecting property? Or is it protecting a small group of folks who have kind of the monopoly on that particular profession? And I think that's something that we've got to evaluate, because we all want people to be safe. Nurses represent half of the licensed professionals under the Secretary of State's office. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense. But I do think we need to look at each and every one and see whether it still makes sense. And I think we need to look at that same litmus test. Does it protect property? Does it preserve health? Does it protect life?
Due to time, we're going to go ahead and make this the last question. I'm sure the candidates will hang around. I know some of you have questions that we're not asking. Last question, and we'll start with very easy. Okay. How would a photo ID requirement for absentee ballots work in situations like the members of the military who may be deployed overseas? So how would a person show proof of photo ID if they are truly absent from the country?
Well, there's really two parts of the question. As it relates to military absentee ballot, there's a new system that there's people talking about that technology and showing us that technology during the last general session for overseas ballots, which was an encrypted, secure system. But I don't think that for the military, you really need to have a photo ID. All you really need to do is have your CO sign that this is actually, Sergeant so-and-so or, Private Smith. It's very easy to do that. I think there's enough trust in the military. They've shown themselves to be honorable people. And I don't think we want to place any burdens on our military. I don't think that's required. As opposed as for having vote photo ID for just people who live in Cherokee County, for absentee, I don't support it. I don't think that federal law actually will support it either. I think we'll run into a legal challenge. I think really what we need to do is get back to just having two people that are signing on to that, and that way it's been verified who they are. And now there's two people that can sign on there. And there's need to be legible signatures so that we know who those witnesses are. And if we find that they've been falsifying information, then they're prosecuted. It sounds very easy to do some of this stuff, such as having, a notary statement and things like that. But if you think about if you're a homebound senior, where are you going to get that person to come in and notarize your absentee ballot? Photo ID has been struck down and it's been a challenge. It's one of those things that, we're just going to face a lot of legal challenges on it. I think the best thing would be having two witnesses sign their name and let them know that for false swearing, we will prosecute you. And then when they do it, we do prosecute. I think that takes care of the issue. Thank you.
If we were going to cave at the first legal challenge, trust me, we wouldn't have a photo ID requirement in the state of Georgia. So I do believe that a photo ID requirement should be a part of the absentee ballot process, and even if the Democrats sue us. Now, I'll also say this, is that when it comes to our military votes, we want to make it easy for them. And I would certainly be willing to work at how do we make that in the best sense possible. But our military is the most high-tech military in the world. How can we not also send a picture of either their military ID or photo ID in that, as being part of that process? That being said, I'm willing to accommodate and figure out how do we work with our military. We owe them a lot. We owe them an incredible debt as citizens of this country. But when it comes to legal challenges, yeah, the next Secretary of State's going to face them, and I'm willing to face those. Thank you.
We are ready for your 1 minute fund. And we'll start with Brad, and just come this way.
As a business owner, I have the executive and leadership vision to run a company with 175 people. As a licensed professional engineer, I know how to get things done, the solutions that work. I understand also the critical importance of business licensing and streamlining regulations for corporations. As an elected public servant, I've never voted for a tax increase, never. I voted to protect seniors, small business owners' life in the Second Amendment. I'm the only person on this stage who has 100% rating from the Faith and Freedom Coalition. At the end of the day, when you vote for me for Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, you'll know you have someone that will fight to make sure that only Americans vote in our elections, make sure that Georgia is a great place to find a job and a great place to build a business. I'm Brad Raffensperger, and I'm asking for your vote for Secretary of State on May 27th. Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight in our night of violent agreement on a lot of issues. But I will repeat and point out that one of us is not like the other. You've got 3 lawmakers. Many of the laws they're talking about changing, they fail to change when they're in the legislature. As your next Secretary of State, I'm the only one who will be ready on day 1 to run a multidisciplinary organization because I have. I'm the only one that's going to be able to accomplish goals that are going to go beyond the authority and resources of the office, which is everything the Secretary of State has to do because I have. And I'm not running to be the Secretary of State's attorney or general counsel. And I'm not running to be the best administrator that that office has ever had. You hire administrators. You elect leaders. I'm not even running just to make a better Secretary of State's office. I'm running to make a better Georgia through the Secretary of State's office, to defeat voter fraud, to champion Georgia jobs. David Belle, Republican for Secretary of State.
All right, real quick, this wraps up our forms for the county and all the positions that we've had that have passed.